Thanks very much for joining us today. I'm Stephen Laverick, and I'm the Business Development Manager for Typify, who's responsible for the EMEA region. I'm joined today by one of our solutions consultants, Damian Gibbs, and today we're going to be discussing publishing multi-format educational content up to 80% faster. We've seen in recent months how global events have dramatically impacted education on all levels, especially how teachers and learners access and use content. With so much education now taking place outside the classroom, it's more important than ever for educational publishers to build flexibility and speed into production processes. This webinar will explore how Typify's automation solutions empower publishers to deliver high-quality print and digital educational content faster and in more formats, giving both publishers and users more options. Let's start with a little bit of background about Typify. Typify was founded in 2001. It's headquartered in Queensland, Australia. Today, we also have offices in the US, the UK, the Netherlands, and Sri Lanka, serving thousands of users in about 35 countries around the world. Typify is an Adobe technology partner. Typify software solutions are a single-source publishing platform that allows users to take their content, whether they're authoring in Microsoft Word, XML, HTML, or in some other way, and automate the output of more than 30 different format options for print, online, or mobile distribution. The first step of the automated workflow is for Typify software to convert the source documents down the left-hand side of the diagram that you can see on your screens into an XML format called Content XML. We'll also be referring to this as CXML. This is a flavor of XML based on the DocBook DTD, and it's optimized to work with the various scriptings and plugins that we've developed over the years. It's not a proprietary XML format or anything like that. Full information about it can be found on the Typify website. Typify then automates the transformation of the CXML into the required output formats. We can output to over 30 different options, the ones that you've got detailed here, XML, Epub, PDF, HTML, DAISY. These are just the ones that we get asked about most often. So if you have another format that you want to output to, just let us know about it. For the output of PDF, specifically for print or web, Typify is built on top of Adobe InDesign Server and automates the layout within that application. Typify has an open API for easy integration with the CMS or workflow management system of your choice. Customers tend to come to us with many different motivations behind wanting to introduce automation into their workflows. Typify automation can offer a significant decrease in the production time for print and digital publications. Customers have seen time savings of up to 80%, which results in a quicker time to market for products and greater ease in responding to the changing needs of schools and educators. Typify customers can also automate output of multiple publication types, all from the same dataset or source files. Using conditions, users can designate content that may be specific to a teacher or student edition of a particular publication or to a state or a region. With the click of a button, the Typify software will automate the output of that publication with only the particular content that is needed for that version. Typify solutions excel at handling design complexity. Adobe InDesign is the world's most used software for desktop publishing. Its easy-to-use interface focused on design means that Typify users don't need to compromise on the design of their products. Whether publications contain images, tables, boxes, multiple columns, margin art, any other design complexities, Typify automation can handle those requirements. Typify users have the ability to create multiple output formats from a single source file, giving publishers more ways to get content to users, helping schools, educators, and students with greater choices when adapting to new methods of instruction outside the classroom. And finally, amongst the output formats that can be created using Typify are accessible options for use by students with impairments that may limit their access to traditional formats. For example, alternative text or alt text for images and tables that are part of the source content can be incorporated during Typify automation to produce outputs which are then compliant with government accessibility requirements. So let's take a look at what some of these benefits have meant to our customers. The IMF was able to dramatically reduce their production time using Typify automation. This was a critical change for them since their content is constantly changing up to the point of publication. Being able to work closer to deadline and produce high quality outputs rapidly despite last-minute changes to content is invaluable to them. IGI Global has been able to achieve higher production volumes through the use of Typify automation. They were able to nearly triple the number of books and journals that they were able to produce, all without the need to add additional staff. Finally, customers like Houghton Mifflin Harcourt have used their newfound additional capacity to work on projects like custom publications. This initiative allowed their customers to select chapters or materials from different publications to create custom books. For example, a user may select a chapter from a maths book, a chapter from science, and a chapter from history. Typify automation then combines the content, updates the folios and tables of contents, creating a new product. This custom publishing avenue allows for expanded use, for reuse of content, and on-demand creation of custom curriculum choices. So now we're able to move on to our demonstration. In the best traditions of Frankfurt Book Fair, we've pre-recorded the demo to make sure that we don't fall foul of any dodgy conference Wi-Fi problems or anything like that. So we can sit back and enjoy that video now. Once again, so much for not having any glitches to do with the Wi-Fi. Having the right video might have helped, mightn't it? Damian, would you be able to explain a little bit about how Typify is able to work? Actually, if you could explain how InDesign Templates are worked with in Typify, and I'll try and figure out what's going on with this video.
Yeah, sure, Stephen. Well, Typify works with various components, and we use the InDesign document as the base for templating. So all the intelligence, all the formatting, what else would you call it? The layout, the guides, all of and part of the automation is included in the InDesign template. So Typify offer a plugin for InDesign, which is called Typify Designer, and that has a number of different elements which provide the automation. So, for example, one of the items would be to decide how and where boxes are placed on screen. If you give me a second, I can get up an InDesign template and we can have a look at what the various components are. All right, so as you can see in front of me, I've got a straightforward InDesign document. I'm working in CC 2018, but we can work with, we support the latest 3 versions of InDesign, so 2020, 2019, and 2018. So the Typify plugins is found under the Windows menu, and we have got 4 basic elements over here, which is the auto fit, elements, fields, and we've got another one which is a file manager, which allows you to check documents in and out, and then finally one which is called sections. I'm going to start with the sections because that's the sort of the global, the high level hierarchy of a document. So when we work with documents in educational publishing or any publishing of long documents, we're all familiar with the concept of a book. And within a book or within a publication, we'll have a cover, a front section, a table of contents, maybe some forwards, and then we move on to the main body of the book, and possibly at the end we have an index or some end matter. So on the right hand side, I've got my tools palette and my panels, and I've got the Typify, the various Typify tools on the right hand side here. So let's start with the sections. I've got a blank palette and we can create a section, and I'll call the section, for example, the main section, so or the body of the book. Essentially what Typify does, it says it's it's a virtual concept. It's nothing physical in the document. It only refers to different components of the InDesign document. So in this instance, we're saying in the main section of the document, we're going to use the A master page, and we can start on either side. And then if there so happens to be a blank page at the end of the section, we're going to fill it with whatever master page we want. And all these features and all these items are InDesign features that are pulled together in a component or in a palette to help with bringing the automation side of it together. We can add a second master page or a third master page, and essentially we're saying to the pagination process to lay out the content with these master pages in this order. So if we had another master page, we could say, once you've laid out content on the first master page, choose the next, and so on and so forth. Down below, we've got our page numbering, and we can say continue from the previous section. One of the main concepts around Typify is that you have different section types. So this one is the main story, and I'll show you in a second what the concept of a main story is. But within books, you also have table of contents and index and endnotes. And these section types are slightly different in that they allow content to be auto-generated. Once for example, a table of contents, once that has been created and the document completed, the table of contents can then be generated based on the complete document. And the same goes for index and endnotes. So once we've created we've created a section, we can create more sections as well. So, for example, your cover or your front matter section would be use different master pages, and so we can build up the various components or the various sections within a publication. Typify elements. We're all familiar with InDesign boxes. We can create a box. And a box can be, we can assign it different content. So we can have a graphic text content depending on what you want to put into that. The same goes for Typify. Typify almost adds like another level of sophistication to your InDesign document, and that you can specify that this type of element will hold various types of content. So we can assign, we would say in InDesign, let's assign this as a text frame. Typify, we can say, let's assign it as a content frame. Although Typify takes us one step further in that we can assign a content frame, and we can place frames within frames or content within the frame. So we can see that the frame has now taken on a slightly different appearance. It's got a blue border. If I change the Typify frame to something else, for example, an image, we've got some image options, and we can see that the frame then changes into a yellow frame. Well, let's just go back to a content frame. Once we've created a Typify frame, we would then go on and give the frame a name. So like we have object styles and character styles and paragraph style. It's a similar concept in that we're going to give the element a particular attribute or an element name. So we'll call this one just box 1, for instance. In InDesign, we know that elements can, or not elements, objects or boxes can be within a text frame as part of text, or they can be anchored to text, or they can be fixed on the page and not associated with anything on the page, so not associated with text or any other objects. Similar applies to Typify. A frame can be inline, fixed, or floating, and as with InDesign, the inline frame would typically be either in another frame or as part of the text and behaves accordingly or behaves in a certain way. Fixed is it's stuck on the page, it doesn't move anywhere, but content can be filled into it. And a floating frame is the one that I find most intriguing, is that it's is anchored with the text, but it has a lot more intelligence behind it that can be assigned. So once we've created our element name, our element type, we can then assign it to this frame. You'll notice at the moment that that when I click the Apply button, that element type has now been assigned to this frame, and we can see that there's a little label down at the bottom. So now this is really where things get really exciting for Typify and automation. You'll see that once we've applied the element to that frame, we have a number of different options down at the bottom. We can say that this frame will then appear on the left or right hand page, or in addition, we can also stipulate or say where this frame will appear on the page when the content is filled into InDesign and the pagination process begins. So this dialog box with the floating elements and the various options takes over, fills in that gap between straight automation, just plonking text on a page, and actually adding some intelligence and saying, where should this object be placed? And this is what typically a typesetter or a book layout artist will do when they lay out pages. They will come across an image will be in a certain part of the text, and the typesetter will then need to make a decision on where to place this image. And typically, images are placed top or bottom of a page, or in line with or associated very closely to the caption or to the reference in the text. So the author or editor would generate or create the content for in this demo. We'll be using Microsoft Word, and the editor will place a reference to an image in the Microsoft Word document. And when that Microsoft Word document is flowed into InDesign, this box will then, or this dialog box will then take over and start performing the decisions. All right, so we can set the attributes to to this type of box. And for example, we can align the box to the top of the text frame or various parts of the page, and we can align the box horizontally to the page or various components. So we can move this box around on the page, top and bottom, based on these requirements. But we can also say that this is the first choice of laying out that box on the page, and if that criteria cannot be met for whatever reason, we can then assign a second choice. And if we really want to, we can then assign possibly a third choice as well. So as a typesetter or a page layout artist or a designer, especially a designer, they could have a look at this kind of component that's going to be used, and then apply the logic in the InDesign template. All the author or the editor can do is say, this is an object that needs to be assigned, placed on a page, and the template will then take over and say where on the page we need to place it. All right, I think Stephen is ready. Stephen, back to you.
Thank you, Damian. Let me take control of the screen again. We'll have another crack.
Hello everyone. First I'll give an overview of the Typify user interface and how to easily navigate around the various components. As Typify uses the world's leading publication design software, Adobe InDesign, as a template for content styling and pagination, we'll take a quick look at the Typify plugin for InDesign, which enables designers and publishers to use existing InDesign documents to intelligently automate page layout with Typify. Next, we'll look at the input content, which in this case is a Word document, and how Typify assists authors and editors to easily format content. Finally, we will run through the content through Typify workflow and produce some common outputs such as PDFs and Epubs. Typify uses web interface, so the only software you need to work with Typify is a web browser. Navigation is via hyperlinked buttons and links. I'm using Typify on my desktop, and as an administrator, I have extra buttons at the top. Normally users would only see files and jobs. The Files button takes you to the root of your Typify installation. Here I have a folder for this demo, and if I click on the folder, it'll open up. At the top you can see a breadcrumb of your current location within Typify. Within this folder, I have some subfolders, which hold various components used in the Typify setup. These folder names are not prescriptive. Organizations can set up according to their own preferences. The Contents folder holds the input content for the demo. This is not required, but is only here purely for convenience for this demo. As you will see shortly, Typify will accept input directly from Word. Also has the facility for API calls from remote systems such as a content management system. Typify makes use of scripting within InDesign during the pagination process to enhance some of InDesign's features or to provide customizations for customers to further automate pagination or outputs. These scripts are stored in the JavaScript folder and called by Typify as and when they're needed. The last folder, Workflows and Outputs, contains the glue which brings the various components of the Typify system together in what is called a workflow and is represented by a rocket icon. When a workflow is run, the output from the job is stored in a folder which has the same name as the workflow, but is shown with the black icon folder above, as you can see there. Looking at the workflow, we can see that there are a number of boxes or components. Each of these boxes is what we call a Typify action. An action, in most cases, performs a single task with an input and an output. The output from one action, for example over here, is passed as an input into the next action, and so on and so on. Actions are plugged together, almost like Lego blocks, to build a workflow. Workflows can be named. You can change the name up here, however you like, but this one I've called Epub-student, as the final output will be an Epub for students. This is because the input content has both teacher and student content, but the workflow has been configured to only output content relative to the student. The first action is the import docx. This action receives the content from the user or an application which will pass on the content and is converted into Typify's content XML format or CXML. The next action applies the condition of student. In other words, remove all the content marked for the teacher. You can see here the output from the first action is passed on as the input to the second action. The codes you see between curly braces are variables which allow you to dynamically name your files based on inputs or metadata. As this job uses custom fonts, the fonts are copied using the copy folder action so that they are made available to InDesign for the pagination. Next, the clean XML, or the second version of the XML, is passed on to the InDesign action, or the InDesign create document action, to begin the pagination. The create InDesign document retrieves a copy of the InDesign template from the templates folder and creates a new document with the name stipulated in the output field. Under the event scripts tab, we can see when and how the scripts are called during the pagination process. Once the InDesign document has been created, it is called by the next action, which is export to Epub action. The Epub is created using the InDesign document with the settings as you can see here. Under the metadata tab, we can see that some of the metadata fields used in the publication have been used to automatically populate the metadata for the Epub. As we move down the workflow, you might have noticed the icons on the top right. These represent the different actions in your workflow and are used for navigation. As you can see, workflows are highly configurable and customizable, allowing organizations to set up input and outputs to suit their production methods. Let's now have a look at the InDesign template. The Typify InDesign template is a normal InDesign document with some additional Typify elements added. All the usual InDesign paragraph, character, object style, table and cell styles are all used to make up the InDesign Typify template. Typify also provides a plugin called Typify Designer, which has a collection of additional tools to help with automation. These tools can be seen here on the right-hand side. These tools allow the designer to set relationships between objects, for example, the yellow box and the blue box. You can move it up and down and the blue box follows. Rules for layout of the objects. So if we have looked at the Elements tab, we can see that we've got some layout rules here. and these will stipulate vertical alignment, horizontal alignment, or where on the page in relation to the anchor the object should be placed. How objects should be resized when they're filled with content, whether it's an element or an image. So for example, this box won't expand greater than that, but can be reduced and won't expand further than its current width. And this is managed with the AutoFit palette. The use of master pages is also important for various layouts and is managed with the section tool. Over here we can see our section tool, and within the chapter we can see that different master pages are applied in different order along with numbering. And finally, the fields palette allows data to be passed through from the source content directly through to InDesign for publishers and designers to use it as and when they need in the pagination process. Typify also makes use of master pages as a library to store elements that are used repeatedly throughout a publication or throughout the pagination process. So for example, here is a collection of boxes or frames of different styles and colors that are used within the document. And on this next page we have a number of or a couple of tables that have got table styles applied to them, and again during the pagination these styling attributes will be pulled across and format the document. So with these tools, creating templates from within InDesign, a familiar tool for many designers, can quickly adapt their existing publication to Typify templates and enable their automation. Whether Typify plugin is installed or not, the InDesign templates and output files are still accessible to the designers. Right, now that we've had a look at the InDesign template, let's go have a look at our input content. I'm just going to close our InDesign document, shuffle that to the right, and open up our content. So for this demonstration, our source content is in a Microsoft Word document. Typify has a ribbon which is added to Word to assist authors and editors to format and provide structure to the content in order to help automate the pagination using the InDesign template that we've just looked at. This is done by linking or attaching a document to a workflow. So here we have the workflow icon, and if I click on that, I can then go browse onto my local server or my local host, and I will choose a workflow which I want to attach to this document. As the workflow has the InDesign template linked, all the style information is fed from the InDesign template to this Word document. This allows the author to style the document with styles set up in the InDesign template, and therefore eliminating any guesswork. If the template is updated with new styles, then by clicking the refresh button, the new styles will be synchronized into the Word document from the InDesign template. These styles are shown in the various buttons available in the Typify ribbon. So for example, here's our section button, which will show all the sections within the template that can be used. If we need to place an element that's available in the InDesign template, we can place it directly from here. Media is very straightforward, and also inserting a table is very straightforward. The paragraph styles and character styles are available from the paragraph and characters palette, which you just click and pop up over here. They work very similar in the same manner of the Windows style palette, but at the same time the Windows styles palette is still available if you prefer to use that. As you can see on the page, we have green items and some blue items. This is Typify markup. You can see that the blue markup has indicated some conditional text. So here we've got some conditional text for a student or a teacher. Conditional text can be set according to text items, element items, or even sections. The equations in this document have been set using Microsoft Word's equation editor. Alright, so let's go ahead now and run a job. We go back to our Typify menu. So I'll click on the Publish button in the top left. I've chosen a PDF output. You'll notice that we have a list of sections here. I'll publish all the sections, but this is a feature whereby you can publish just certain sections within the content. This is helpful if you just want to proof one section and not have to go print the whole book in order to see the content that you want to proof. Right, when I click publish, Typify runs through the document and does a check, and will start spooling the content down to the server. You'll see that the print manager will pop up in a second, and the content will then start spooling. All right, here we can see that the content has been fed down to the Typify server, and the job has begun, and the pagination process has started on the right-hand side with InDesign having received the content and the Typify engine starting to lay out the content. If we swap across to the to Typify server, we can see that the job is in progress because the little cogwheel is spinning and the job is in italics. If I click on that link, the jobs folder will open up, and a running log is on the go, so you can see what's happening with your job at the same time. While a job is running, you can navigate and work around within Typify. You don't have to wait for the job to finish. In fact, you could start spooling another job from Microsoft Word or any other inputs that you have, and the jobs will be queued one behind each other, or in the case of multiple installations of Typify, the job will be fed to a queued server or the next available InDesign server. Alright, so the document has almost completed with its pagination. The next step in the workflow is to save the document, and then the following action is the export to PDF action, which will then open up the InDesign document and export it to the PDF. You can see the log has completed all the pagination, and it is currently saving the document, and there we can see that it will close the document and then open it up for the next action to complete. All right, our job is complete. When running a job from Typify Writer from Microsoft Word, the PDF or the output for the workflow is automatically fed back to the user, and hence we have got our PDFs directly in Acrobat displayed on our screen. If we go back to the completed job, you'll see that this is the output from the job folder. It contains some metadata about the job, how long it took. And in multi-user instances, you'd also have the username next to the workflow name. You've got a path or a breadcrumb showing you where your job is, whereabouts in the job folder, and within here we have all the files that are used to create the job. So including the output files, which would be your web and print PDF, but including your input document, the InDesign document that was used to create the PDFs, your intermediary XML files, and any other information that was used in the creation of the output. We have a logs folder and a workflow log, which gives you feedback about anything that might have happened during the process. All right, we know that the PDF has been fed back to us from the print manager, but I'm going to close that, and I'm going to download a PDF directly from
from the server. I've downloaded the web PDF. You can see it's displayed on the screen here. The hyperlinks and cross-references have all been included. I can click on any of these links and it will take me to the document as a bookmark. The internal table of contents is hyperlinked as well. I can go to the teacher notes section at the back. Remember, this was a document which was designed to include the teacher material, and we've made a special section whereby the teacher section gets special numbering, including indicated by the T at the bottom. We've got cross-references which are linkable within the document, so we can go back and forth, and hyperlinks are also available and working. So if we go back into our job folder, we can see that we have a web PDF and we also have a print PDF. This print PDF has been produced without crop marks, but you can see that there's no bookmarks or anything that's part of the PDF, which is obviously not necessary for when you're creating a print PDF. We'll also have a look and notice that in the web PDF we can see that the teacher reference numbers at the top level headings are relevant to the teachers and not the ones that were produced for the students. So here is our student number, which is the 38, and the teacher's number was 308. And these would be numbers, say, for example, to cross-reference to curriculum references in the national curriculum. So through this, we can see that we can use a single source and produce multiple outputs, in this case 2 different kinds of PDFs, and we can also produce multiple output contents based on the requirements of the publisher. Alright, now that we have got our PDFs, let's go back to our input document and let's create EPUBs out of the content. So this time I'm going to go back to my publish button and I'm going to choose a different workflow. So I want to, we've created a PDF for the teachers, let's go ahead and create an EPUB for the students. Again, I'll click the button and I'll say publish, and as for the PDFs, the content will be streamed down to the Typify server and the process will be run again. This time the workflow is using an optimized InDesign template, which is being specifically designed to generate a good EPUB, and the process will carry on. Because this document is using math typesetting, we are using a tool called Math Tools, and which will generate equations using the live MathML. So on the right hand side here you can see that the MathML has been flown into InDesign. A script runs which converts that MathML into Math Tools equations, and that's how we get beautifully typeset equations which can either then be exported as images in the EPUB or as live text. All right, our workflow is almost complete. The InDesign document is just being saved. Following that, the document is opened again by InDesign to then export to EPUB, and once again we'll export another EPUB. One EPUB will be with the equations as live text, and the other EPUB will be with equations as images. All right, our workflow is finally done. And here you can see we've got 2 EPUBs, one with the images and one with MathML. Let's go ahead and download our one EPUB. We'll open it up in Adobe Digital Editions. Here you can see you've got your cover, and everything is complete. And we can see that these equations are as live text and get recomposed on the fly by Adobe Digital Editions. We also have an EPUB that's with the equations as images for those EPUB readers that do not yet support live MathML. These are just 2 examples of how organizations can use Typify to produce various output file types such as PDF and EPUB, and each with its own variations of the content, all from a single source. By using industry standard software, Word and InDesign, designers, authors, and editors are able to adopt Typify automation using familiar tools. Understandably, preferences on how to structure workflows will vary from organization to organization. However, Typify's modular approach to automation allows organizations to comfortably integrate Typify and do more.
I'm aware that we've run over due to the technical issues that we had a little bit earlier on. It might be an idea for us to be able to tackle any questions following up over email. The questions that have come in, I'll go back to the attendees on those with answers. And yes, I think that we'll wrap it up for today. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much for taking the time to attend the webinar, and stay safe, everybody.